Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Agentic AI Identities. Is your organization prepared? My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be moderating today's event. Our featured speakers are Ken Buckler, Research Director at EMA, and Damon Teepee, Head of Product Marketing at Ory. Ken has over 15 years of industry experience as a noted information and cybersecurity practitioner, software developer, author, and presenter. Focusing on strict federal security standards, Ken has consulted with numerous federal organizations, including the Defense Information Systems Agency, Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Census Bureau. With 3 decades navigating the security and identity landscape, Damon excels at the crucial translation, turning complex technical innovation into clear, market-driven growth narratives. His track record spans executive leadership roles at industry leaders like Red Hat, Quest Software, and CloudBolt. While Ken and Damon will defer answering your questions until the conclusion of today's event, we encourage you to log your questions anytime using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the on-demand playback as well as some additional information, so be sure to check that email out. And before I hand things over to Ken and Damon, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us. As a thank you for attending, you will be receiving a free copy of this new research. It will go out within the next week or so. You can stay until the end to get more information about that free research. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to today's featured speakers, Ken and Damon. Ken, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Raleigh. Really appreciate it. So this has been some really interesting research that we set out on, and Damon actually approached me several months ago about this, and he was like, I really want to find out what are the challenges that people are having when it comes to agentic AI and managing their identities. And so, obviously identity is one of my main focus areas here at EMA, and I have asked the question over and over and over. How are people treating AI, especially agentic AI, when it comes to identity? And nobody can really give me a good answer. So we finally got the research in here, and we got 271 people to actually give me their own answer. A lot of them are some very interesting answers, but that was 500 or more employee organizations and across a very large number of industries. So, Damon, what are your thoughts on all of this? You think this is probably a good representation for the entire globe?
Yeah, I believe so. We tried to go with a nice cross section of industries, geographies, company sizes. Even if we talk about the sizes just for a second, 41% come from these organizations, 500 employees to 2,500. 31% come from 2,500 to 7,500, and 28% from 7,500 and above. So we've got a nice cross section. We've got nice geographical dispersion and nice sizes. So I think we're statistically relevant in the information that we'll be going over today.
Yeah, and now, of course, not on this slide, though. We did also do some cross analysis based upon specific industries, and we found that really the challenges are pretty much the same across whatever industry you're in. Some slight variations in the percentages, but for the most part, when it comes to agentic AI and IAM, we're talking pretty much the same challenges. So, how are organizations planning on using uh, their agentic AI, and how many organizations are planning on using it? Well, first off, I was absolutely blown away by the fact that only 2% of the respondents said they're not going to use agentic AI at all. That's pretty incredible to me. We're seeing a tremendous growth, and just a year ago, we actually did another research on AI, and now we one of the things we asked in that was, what is your plans for how are you going to use AI in your organization? Nobody mentioned the word agentic at all. Nobody mentioned autonomous AI at all. everything was focused on this is how we're going to use it to assist our employees, assist people, not this is how we're going to just let it run on its own. So, Damon, I'm blown away by this growth.
I am too. Like literally within what, a year, maybe
Yeah.
18 months, we're going from zero interest to 98%. That is explosive, almost. And, it almost begs the question. I couldn't think of when I've experienced this kind of explosive growth before. I mean, like, have you've been in this industry for a while?
Not not really. I mean, I've seen rapid adoption of technology, but I've never really seen anything take off this extremely fast, other than maybe when ChatGPT and the AIs originally started out becoming popular. But something that people didn't realize was, when like ChatGPT and Gemini and all them started becoming popular, those had actually already been in development for several years, were out for several years. It was just all of a sudden it reached that viral tipping point, basically. So
You know,
yeah,
I think
really
another
interesting.
thing. Yeah, yeah. Another thing, though, too, related to like the deployment stage that kind of really surprised me is how much was in production, right? Deployed at
Yeah,
scale in production and then limited deployment. Like I would have expected to see a little bit more in the planning exploration stage or the pilot program. Like we're dipping our toe in the pool, but nope, we're jumping in the deep end.
yeah, and that can actually also be concerning, and especially as we dive into some of the more data here, it's I'm very concerned that a lot of the industry is deploying before they have a plan to make it secure. And that's how we end up with data breaches. That's how we end up with data loss. That's how we end up with people's identities compromised. So I think it's going to be pretty eye-opening. I'll go ahead and go here to the what are organizations planning on using agentic AI for? And there was a lot of various focuses, like we're going to use it to personalize our interactions with customers. We're going to use it for quality assurance of our processes. We're going to use it to reduce our costs and enhance our customer experiences. But the number two response on this was we're going to make sure we include human oversight. And that's going to be I think, a theme when it comes to a lot of the things in this webinar, that there's this huge reliance on human oversight, but I've got a lot of concerns on that because it's not scalable. So, and Damon, I know you had some thoughts on this slide as well.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous, I guess is the word that I would use to deploy at this kind of scale, assuming that people can grow with it or that this oversight can grow with it. I mean, like we're going to have to get to a point where we automate the authentication, we automate the authorization. We've got to be able to tell whether it's a good agent or a bad agent. We've got to be able to limit what that agent can do. That's to me, the authorized part. And doing that or thinking that we can do that with human oversight, and then at the deployment scale of 98%, doing something, to me, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. And I think, I'm a little concerned what 2026 can bring.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, I agree. And then, so we went in and we pulled some quotes directly from some of the open responses. And a couple of the quotes that really stuck out to me, especially this one here. They envision to deploy agentic AI at full scale to operate various core responsibilities like interacting fully with customers. Now, we just saw this huge talk about human oversight. This seems to be a conflict between the human oversight and what they actually want to do with the AI. What are your thoughts on that, Damon?
I mean, I think AI's got all the potential to greatly impact customer, partner, and employee interactions. But again, without those controls, I'm just imagining bad guys weaponizing agents for malicious or
Yeah,
nefarious acts. So,
yeah,
I mean, like one of the things that, and we'll send this link out to the group later, but just last week, there's a guy named Alex Shapiro. He wrote an article and it says, How I Reverse Engineered a $1 billion legal AI tool and found 100,000 confidential files. The subhead reads, Zero authentication, full admin access, and a privacy nightmare for lawyers.
that's
You know,
terrifying.
exact, and you know what the fear is that this is only going to become more and more and more. You know,
Yeah.
again, with the deployment numbers so high and the lack of you know authentication, authorization, and controlled guardrails, whatever the word we want to use, in there. It's just concerning, and you know,
Yeah.
and you know, I hope the audience isn't like, oh my God, these guys are sounding the alarm bells. But I mean, to a certain extent, I think that's part of what we're trying to do is saying, hey, look, we might have jumped in too fully, and now it's time to
Yeah.
maybe walk back a little bit and make sure that we do this right because it has all the potential to be wonderful for the future. It just needs to be done properly.
Well, and you know, something that I always find in some of these more interesting research surveys is that usually we'll ask people who respond to the survey. And by the way, these are all typically IT decision makers that are responding to these surveys, and we'll ask them, yeah, what are your thoughts on everything? Is everything okay? And most of them typically respond, "Yep, everything is perfectly fine. We're all fine here. We're all good, and you know, we're happy with the way things are going." But then when you start diving into the data on stuff like this, you start seeing these conflicts. You start seeing stuff like, well, we want it to work at full scale by itself, but also at the same time we want human oversight because we don't trust it to work by itself. And it's when you start seeing these conflicts, you realize that a lot of the responses here, there's this false sense of everything's good, everything's fine, but things are not as fine as people realize. People, it's we've got some serious challenges in the industry, especially when you see right here we have they want to help and act on human behalf. I'm sorry, help and act on behalf with human oversight in the next 18 months, but that's in direct conflict with the quote that we just saw, and most of the responses that we saw had this conflict that we want it to work on its own, but we also want to supervise it while it's working on its own. And you can't do both. You absolutely can't do both. So we've got a real conundrum here in the industry of which direction do we want to go. And it's not scalable if we have it where you have constant human in the loop. And I hear that term over and over and over is human in the loop. We're going to have human in the loop. So for safety's sake. And that's great, but then and I wish that I could figure out a way that we could actually get the attackers to take these kind of surveys because I think the data for that would be really interesting because the attackers aren't going to care about human in the loop. The attackers are developing these agentic agents, these agentic AIs, and we've seen this in the news recently, that the attackers are developing these agents to autonomously attack organizations, autonomously traverse an organization's network, find those open exploits, find those weaknesses, and they're not worrying about human in the loop. So if they're not worrying about human in the loop, they're always going to have an advantage over the defenders. So I'm just, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where this ends up going. And especially when you see there seems to be a little bit more trust towards working on behalf of employees, I think, versus working on behalf of customers. But I'm not. It's really interesting data here. What are your thoughts, Damon?
Yeah, that was another point, like the near equal distribution of agents helping employees versus helping customers, contractors surprised me. I would
Yeah,
have expected people to, let's call it, dip the toe in the pool with employees first. It's more controlled environment, versus the external of customers and contractors and bad guys and good guys and everybody else, right? Like, why wouldn't I have kind of learned my trade a little bit more with employees that I have a little bit more oversight and control over?
right,
It surprised me. And again, I think a lot of this has to do with there's just a rush to implement agentic, or at least that's the general feeling. That's the feeling I get through, a lot of these answers. It's just people are just rushing out there to get that, some kind of advantage. I worry though
right.
that they're going to hit that cliff, right, and just run right off of it. And hey, I wanted an advantage, but instead I got a bunch of problems.
Yeah, yeah. It really feels like we're deploying before we're actually securing, and actually the data speaks to that more here in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, basically, human involvement is not scalable, and we're seeing people say that we need to have the human involvement because we don't trust the results, and this is contrary to the direction of the industry that the industry wants to go. So I'm just, how do we overcome it? How do we overcome this challenge with human involvement having to be a requirement for safety's sake?
I think people need to implement controls and then see the success of that implementation. It'll take a couple more of these how I reverse engineered $1 billion legal AI tool, or
Yeah,
that kind of press. I think for people to kind of open their eyes a little bit. But you know, another thing too is like we get people coming all the time to Ori talking about how, there's delays and disruptions for customers, partners, and employees, and they care most about the customers and partners. But I mean, like, think of that scale too.
yeah,
Certain AI, IAM solutions are choking on that today. With the rise of agentic and the promise of there's going to be way more agents than there are people. That's going to put a lot of pressure too. So I mean, it's like not only are we not going to be able to scale from a human perspective involvement, but I think some of these systems are going to struggle a little bit too, that are already struggling
yep,
today. So
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely agree. And I think it's going to be interesting as we see this industry evolve. It really is. So let's look at some of the security issues that we're starting to see already. And as I mentioned earlier, we're deploying before we're ready. And we've got, so this is a look at, are you ready to actually have agentic AI in your organization? And they first of all, there's a huge gap with systems, tools, and controls to identify agents interacting with public-facing systems. We're talking less than half have those tools and controls in place, but it's almost 50% of them don't even have documented policies to manage this stuff anyways. So you have to question how effective those tools are. And I mean, I'm glad that we're doing good with the tools for internal systems. That 76% number I think is probably encouraging. But how good are those tools working without those documented policies?
100%, right? I mean, like, controls without policy sound like future complexity to me.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
And a configuration control nightmare.
yeah, yeah. It seems like spending a little time thinking about how to protect, how to put guardrails in place will help us avoid some of this. And, I think some of our goal today is to make that a reality for the audience and anybody else who watches this. I mean, like, we're kind of pounding on this drum pretty hard. But it did blow me away though that the 46 on the public facing systems, the 46%. You would think that those are your most vulnerable.
Right.
Systems, and therefore would then require the most policies or controls or something. But again, I think it's indicative of our rush to get out there and use agents. And I really hope that we don't have to pay a price, but I think 2026 may force us, or some of us,
Yeah.
to pay a price.
Yeah, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And now looking at this number here for okay, we have documented policies, 55%. So 45% don't have documented policies. But of those 45% that don't have documented policies, 79% of them without documented policies went ahead and just deployed anyway. I and we're talking deployed in production, not testing. This is, either they deployed it uh, as at least a small pilot program, or they actually deployed it fully at scale. Uh, why? Why are we doing this? Why are we deploying agents in production when we don't have security controls documented for those agents? This is setting us up for disaster.
Well, and think about it too. It may not always be a bad actor that causes this
Yeah,
problem.
it
I've
could
got
be
another. I got
accidental.
another. Yeah, I got another example. This was, I believe, it was over the summer. I think it was July, where an AI agent doing internal things took out or wiped out a production database.
Yeah,
And then when asked about it, it lied and said it didn't do it. That to me is a clear indication that maybe we're not ready. That's why, I think on the previous slide, I said we should probably be focused a little bit more internal. That was focused internal, right?
right.
And there's still an issue and a problem in and around, not so much authentication, but more the authorization or the controls, the guardrails. What should you be able to do? You should not be able to delete a production database. And maybe that's where the people want the human oversight. But again, when you talk about the number of production databases and the number of agents, is somebody going to be able to sit there and
Yeah,
go, "That's okay," "That's okay"? I doubt it. And I'm not sure I'd trust my company on it. Um,
right. Yeah,
so
I mean, and I think the solution to that is if we're going to deploy agents, we need strict identity access controls on those agents. But of course, if you're not properly managing the identity for those agents, then that's going to be near impossible. And that that probably brings us up to this interesting tidbit is that how many platforms are organizations using? Now, this isn't even taking into account the agentic AI. This is just how many platforms does your organization use when it comes to identity management? And the average is three. I I I I I just hate to imagine the costs associated with
oh,
maintaining three different IAM platforms at the same time. I mean, there's always been this huge push in the industry for tool consolidation. You want to see a good place for tool consolidation, a good place for budget savings. Here it is, right here. Here's your numbers. And, we're talking only 24% of organizations have managed to get down to a single IAM. So now, Damon, I know this is what Ori specializes in. What are your thoughts on how can we move towards reducing our costs, move towards a single IAM, and maybe we'll never, maybe the single IAM is never achievable. I can't say that for sure, but how do we at least reduce that number?
I talk with customers, I talk with prospects every week, and what I hear over and over and over again is, they'll have a different IAM system maybe for employees or for partners and customers. And so they're dealing with this today, and that's why they're coming to Ori saying, "Hey, I've either gotten this to a point where I can no longer manage it, configure it. It's gotten unwieldy and complex." And so, you know. again, our advice is start with your most complex use case, which tends, or the one that you
Yeah,
care the most about. And that tends to be customers, right? That's where your revenue comes from. Partners is probably a close second in that, because it leads to revenue. I worry less about employees. And I think we've already, if I had to guess, I'd say we've got employees covered more so. Where are your threats really going to come from? They're going to come from partners, and they're going to come from outside the organization. So I think, I'll talk a little bit later about what Ori can do to specifically help. But I think it's time to start looking away from some of the big box vendors, the lock-in,
right,
the rigidity of some of these vendors, and then you know the audacity to charge what they do for what they offer.
yeah,
It's just I think this agentic movement might be a good time to one seek consolidation. Adding yet another IAM solution to the mix for agentic isn't going to really help the story, right? It just adds more complexity. It adds more people to manage that potentially. So I think this is a great opportunity as we look for this new use case in IAM to how can we consolidate? How can we, consolidate systems? How can we consolidate vendors? How can we get it down to, I don't know if we'll ever get down to one throat to choke, but that should be at least the goal, or at least
right.
in the frame of the mind.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, and you touched on something really interesting there. Is that maybe this is the tipping point that kind of forces organizations to move towards a single IAM solution, and this is not a thing that's just isolated to just IAM. Give you a great example. 2020, global pandemic. What did that result in? That resulted in a huge shift towards remote work. That was already something that most companies already had the capability to do. They just didn't want to take that leap. Well, all of a sudden, something comes along that pushes them into taking that leap. I suspect that agentic AI might end up being the tipping point when it comes to IAM and push them to take that leap to consolidate their IAM tools.
I think we're going to get forced into it. If we
Yep,
don't do it on our own, we're going to be forced to do it.
right. Now, but of course, here's the problem with that is we're going to get forced into it, but most of the solutions aren't ready. And I was pretty terrified when I saw these numbers come back, and I actually had to do a double take on the data and be like, are we sure this is valid data? And I was like, okay, yep, this is valid data. And I think that the fact that we've got a high focus on compliancy. I say high, but still only slightly over half. We've got the higher focus on compliancy. That is kind of in line with what we know about most of the IAM solutions that are out there, is that they're focused on complying with regulatory standards, focused on making sure that your identities are in that compliance. But there's a lot of other, serious concerns that when it comes to the agentic AI capabilities, they just aren't there. And I think that goes back to the conversation I've had over this past year of with all the different vendors and all the different enterprises I've talked to, and I ask them, how are you treating agentic AI from an identity perspective? And nobody can give me a good answer. And I think the reason for that is because that so many of the tools out there just simply aren't prepared to handle agentic AI.
Well, you go back to, the previous slide, 58%, if you add up the three or more, 58% have multiple, three or more identity and access management systems, yet still they're not ready.
Yeah,
That seems a little crazy almost, like, and I'm imagining you get to 5 and 6 IAM solutions because one didn't do the thing that you wanted it to do. So I bought another one and I patched that on
Yep.
and, kind of did that thing. Um, to me, the other kind of stark reality of this slide is that people are admitting that their control system, their security systems, their will not scale. It's not as secure as it needs to be. It's maybe not as compliant as it needs to be, and maybe it's not up and running as
Yeah.
often as it needs to be. Yet we ran out there. 98% of people are deploying agentic, and it's like, to me, it's like, what's the thought process, right? I mean, like that's where I just go, oh
Yep.
my, I don't quite get it. Um, but again, I don't want to, I don't want to turn this into a product pitch. I've got my opportunity to talk about Ory and how I think we can help in some of these arenas a little bit later. But what I will encourage organizations to do is, because think about the most popular identity management solutions. These are likely the ones that most people have, and they're the ones that people are poking at that aren't ready. What I'll encourage our audience and anybody else who would be listening to this webinar do is look at some more up and coming vendors. Ori is an up and coming vendor, but there are a lot of other ones. There's just new strides being made in this
Yeah.
arena that need to be taken a look at. The whole, I bought IBM and therefore I'm safe. It kind of goes out the door. If you don't think it's ready, it's not ready. It doesn't matter whether it's IBM or Microsoft or whatever. If it's not getting it done, it's not getting it done. And I hate to use the examples again that I had before, but if you're able to reverse engineer an AI agent, get it to do what you want pretty quickly. And this guy was just messing around. I mean, he wasn't trying to do anything malicious. And then he published what he did. So he wasn't a bad actor
Right.
per se. He's a good actor, just trying to bring awareness to a bad problem. But it is scary.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think that it's really also very telling when you look at the fragmentation when it comes to actually managing the security and compliance issues around agentic AI, in that a lot of these organizations are not seeing a single source of truth, basically, a single authority on this is how your agentic AI needs to behave from a security perspective. When you start having, I'm going to say two or more, but the fact that we even got a three, a four, and a five on here is terrifying to me. When you start looking at more and more people having their hands in the cookie jar, so to speak, then you end up with a lot of conflicts, and this probably goes back to why we don't have all those security policies documented in the first place. Well, why? Because you can't get two, three, or four or five people to agree on what those security policies need to be in the first place. So it really creates a problem where, well, we know we need to get agentic AI out the door, but we still don't know how we're going to secure it.
71% report two or more teams own security and compliance, right? So I just literally added it up. If you think about it, if two or more own the problem, nobody owns the problem.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and 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 that's kind of where we're at, right? We're going to have fragmentation, we're going to have ineffective results, we're going to have siloed efforts, and none of which is going to be good, and will create cracks for bad actors to do bad, nefarious things, which will ultimately then get us to close those gaps. But it's
yeah,
it's unfortunate that it feels like we're going to have to get down into that nitty gritty, have some of those bad things happen in order for change to actually occur.
yeah. And this needs to be an organizational shift. There's no tool that's going to fix this. This needs to be a mindset shift of, we talk about how organizations need to have a security mindset. Well, once again, this is it right here. This is where you need to have a security mindset and you need to actually be able to have agreement on that security mindset, but you need a singular voice to guide that mindset. So, where are organizations going to deploy LLMs and agentic AI? Most organizations, 71%, want to manage it themselves. Now, that can either be self-managed on-prem, that could be private cloud, but there's a very huge resistance when it comes to being able to be hands off on the management. And part of me wonders if this might also be related to the wanting to have the human in the loop part as well. You know, I'm I have seen in this industry, I've been in this industry for almost 20 years now, and I keep seeing this rubber band effect in that we're going to shift everything to the cloud, and now we're going to shift everything back to on-prem. We're going to shift everything to the cloud, and now we're going to shift everything back to either on-prem or in private cloud. And Damon, I know you've been in the industry for quite some time as well. Uh, What are your thoughts on this shift of we want the control?
I don't fault them for it. I mean, like I get where it comes from. I understand it, but I mean, like the keep going back and forth and back and forth. It tells me that maybe we didn't really get it as right the first time, second time, third time that we should have.
Yeah,
The fact that we have to keep going back and forth. I would 100% say that, the fact that organizations 71% want to self-manage is part of that human oversight piece, or so they think or feel. You know, I'm not so sure that it's any more secure self-managed than vendor managed for
right,
that matter. Again, when there's no documented policies, it doesn't matter, right? Whether
right.
it's up
Now,
in the
now
cloud or it's on-prem.
regulatory compliance is a different beast on that, but it might be easier to achieve it that way. But yeah,
100%. To me, this was surprising to me, but I think the next slide was even more surprising, and not trying to
yeah,
lead into the next one, but I mean, like that one's the one that I'm
yeah.
like, wow, okay.
Uh-huh. Yep. All right. So yeah, so I'll go ahead and stop the suspense there is that and I can kind of see the correlation here in that organizations they want to start taking back that control because if you're going to have your LLMs on-prem or in a private cloud, you need to have that control for your IAM as well. Now, that means that well, one of the problems with that is that so many of the solutions that are IAM solutions now are SaaS solutions. They're not private cloud. They're not on-prem. You don't control it yourself. You sign up for an account with somebody, and then they manage the back end part. You just manage the organization itself.
Think about it, right? That all that SaaS solutions that are out there, what was it, two, three slides before, the majority say they're not ready. They don't scale. They're not
Right,
resilient. They're not compliant, or as compliant as they want them. I forget, and they're not as secure.
right,
So to me, it's natural for people to go, okay, well then I'm going to bring this back in house. Um, I think it's a mistake by some of the larger IAM players to not have a self-hosted,
right,
self-managed opportunity. I mean, I see some of them that they want to maybe take their code and put it into a Docker or private cloud, something like that, where they might be able to manage it a bit. But that's like after the thought thinking. A company like Ory, we offer self-hosted, self-managed, whether that's open source, whether that's Ori Enterprise license, which we'll get into specifics of what that is, and we also offer a SaaS, and it's all the same code base. So ideally, you could
right.
start with with one and end up on the other. Because everybody's got different ways that they approach this. I mean, smaller companies, SaaS is maybe the only way that they can go about doing this until they grow to a certain size. But it's interesting, I
Yeah.
talk with lots of customers doing case studies and stuff like that. And one of the big selling points for Ory is what they call a backup plan, or they think about it as a backup plan. It's like, hey, look, I can start down one path, again, whether it's self-hosted on-prem, private cloud, or SaaS, doesn't matter. I can start with one and I can evolve to the other if I
Right.
want to. And so it's having that freedom, I think, is basically what the market's kind of screaming for.
And now you said you were surprised by the previous slide, but this is the one that really got me, is that most organizations are preferring all-in-one platforms. Now there's a serious conflict for IAM solutions to be an all-in-one platform, and you look at this previous slide here where they want it to be on-prem or private cloud. Okay, the problem with that is that those all-in-one platforms are not typically on-prem or private cloud. They're typically a SaaS solution. So we have a serious conflict in the IAM industry as a whole, where we've got these all-in-one solutions that customers want, but the IAM solutions are not where the customers want them. And what are your thoughts, Damon? How do we fix that? I mean, do you think that more vendors will start offering their all-in-one solution in private cloud or on-prem?
I think they're going to have to. I mean, like, look, if your customers are dictating um, that they want it a particular way, you're either going to be resistant to doing that and you're going to lose ground to people who do, or you're going to make the change. And I think there's too much at stake. I think kind of what we're seeing here is a transition period, right? We're kind of in between things. You talked about the rubber band before. Maybe we're at it's snapping back and people are feeling this way now.
Right.
I think that's why, I encourage organizations to look at both. I mean, temper expectations too with, what you expect an all-in-one platform. That can go a lot of different ways, and I don't want to spend
Yeah.
a whole lot of time thinking about what exactly does that mean right here on this call. Um, but what I would encourage the audience and other people who are thinking the same way is break that down. What does that mean? What does an all-in-one platform mean? And what do I really want from it? I mean, today it's self-hosted on-prem. What's tomorrow going to be? What I would encourage people
Right.
is don't get locked into a vendor that's not going to give you some of that flexibility.
Yeah.
Because then you're kind of, you know, I'm stuck with it for 3 years minimum, and then my switching costs become ridiculous. And, you know, go with vendors that are giving you that flexibility right off the bat, such that in 2, 3 years or 6 months, you want to course correct or shift, you have that freedom, you have that ability where, with some of the other major, I'll call them proprietary lock-in vendors, you may not.
Right. And I think it's important to point out here that, if you look at the previous slides, only 24% of organizations have managed to adopt a single IAM solution in their enterprise. So there's a huge gap here where they want to adopt the all-in-one solutions. They want to get down to a single solution, but they just can't do it. And a lot of that is technical limitations. So,
Aspirational goal.
yeah. And it's a good goal. It's, tool
Yeah.
consolidation I will always push for. So now we need to talk about how do we fix this as an industry, and how can organizations start addressing this now? Clearly, there's a big gap in the currently available technology, and that most of the solutions that are out there just simply don't meet the needs. There's a few that do, but a lot of them are really coming up short. So, Damon, I know you had a few thoughts that you wanted to share before we start diving into some of the action steps. You want to go ahead and give those a shot?
Actually, my thoughts were more on the action steps. So if we want to just kind of
Okay.
dive in,
Yeah.
I'm a little concerned too that we're not going to leave people an opportunity for
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
So,
We,
I'm
I
trying to
am
move a little
long-winded,
faster.
so, so that's okay. No worries. So, yeah. So, I think it's really interesting to see what the AI strategies are. And this is all based upon, the open-ended responses when we ask, how are you going to future-proof? How are you going to, what's your success strategy when it comes to agentic AI? And it was a lot of varying strategies. There was no one cohesive strategy, but noticeably absent in any of the strategies was any mention of identity. And now I'm a data nerd, so I'm going to go with one of the things that I love to say all the time is sometimes the lack of data is data, and the fact that there's so many people struggling, so many people saying my stuff isn't ready, I'm not ready to deploy agentic AI, but they never mentioned having identity as part of their success strategy in the first place. Maybe that's the issue. Maybe that is actually the keys to success here is we need to start adopting better strategies when it comes to managing the identities of these agentic AIs.
I mean, to me, it's kind of simple. If we don't have strong authentication and ways to identify whether an agent is good or bad, and we don't have some kind of guardrails, constraints in and around what they can do, it's the Wild West.
Right.
And so, it whether we're thinking about it, and I say the collective we are thinking about it that way or not, we're going to be forced to think about it here soon as we hear more about like what happened last week. And
Yeah.
it's a shame that it's not in the mindset right off the bat. But you know, yeah, I mean, like here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It's
I think it's important to talk about how we have these huge security gaps that need resolved. We need to close these operational gaps. And unfortunately, I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. Well, in this case, I don't always secure my AI, but now when I do, a lot of us are doing it in production. So we're now faced with that challenge yet again, where we've deployed something and we need to close that security gap, and we need to do that now.
Well, and it's and people, right? That's where I think the thought is, oh, well, we'll put some human involvement in there, and that'll be our stopgap or whatever. Unfortunately, I think people are going to realize relatively quickly that's just it's not even it's not going to get you very far. There's just simply not enough people. You're not going to have enough employees.
Yeah,
It's not going to do that. You take the limitations or the perceived limitations of existing IAM solutions, and you know uh, there's just a rude awakening. I think that's coming for the thought processes. And
yeah,
hey, if this is the catalyst for our audience members to begin that transition and begin some of that thought process, great. That's what we're here for. That's what this is all about. For those that don't, I think this can become the difference between those who get ahead and who don't. I mean, that has to be the reason that we deployed AI agents so much right now. It's like we're looking to get
absolutely.
that advantage, right? And it's like, well, those who adapt and put controls in place will be able to take advantage of that much more readily than those who don't. And I'm not sure I can be any
Yeah.
more clear.
Yeah, no, no, I agree. And I think that, that leads into this one too, is once again, we have these identity focused gaps when it comes to IAM solutions. We have to modernize our IAM and our identity stack. We have to modernize our identity technology stack in order to solve these gaps. Unfortunately, that's going to, and oftentimes that's probably going to end up being you have to replace a solution unless the vendor is willing to adapt very quickly to what is happening in the industry. And unfortunately, some of the vendors out there, I think, have become complacent in that we're managing human identities, we're managing non-human identities. Sometimes some of them don't even do that. Some only manage human identities, but those non-human identities are just service accounts or API keys, and that's it. And we're not going to have any consideration for how are we going to manage the agentic AIs. And I think that really is the root cause of all of these security gaps we're seeing here, because when it comes to the agentic AI, you can't treat it as just a human. You can't treat it as just a service account.
And look at it this way. If your current IAM solution, these are people telling us their current solutions cannot handle agentic. Um, it's time to evaluate more modern solutions. And just, I think I said it a couple slides ago, look at some of the up and coming vendors,
Yeah,
because the majority of people have the established legacy vendors and they're not meeting the need. So if that's not doing the trick, then it's time to look at downstream a little bit where there is some innovation happening. There is some different approaches that I think can really take hold here in this new agentic era. And
yeah,
I hope Ori is one of those companies.
yeah. And I know we're running real short on time, but I wanted to go ahead and mention this one, and then I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about Ori. But obviously, one of the goals we mentioned earlier is tool consolidation.
Yep.
And I think that that's probably something you're probably going to talk about in the next slide, is how Ori can help with that. But the fewer tools you have in an organization, the less time you have to spend managing those tools, the more time you can spend on actually trying to solve your problems, on actually managing the enterprise and not managing the tools that are managing your enterprise. So with that, I'm going to move it over to this slide, and Damon, talk to me a little bit about how Ori can help solve these challenges.
And then really this is the 900,000 foot view, but Ori has self-hosted and managed solutions, I think, as I alluded to before. Self-hosting starts with our open source solutions, but then we offer enterprise license, which is going to give you things like enterprise support, SLAs for CVEs. We test and harden that open source code. We have way more releases on an enterprise level. And those are the self-hosted on-prem private cloud solutions. Same, we offer the same on the network and a SaaS, and all solutions come from the same code base, written in Golang, using a standards-based API-first architecture. The other kind of interesting thing, and it's the offers a bolt-on solution, and this is the idea of it makes it easier to consolidate. Ori is composable, meaning that you can use one of the products shown on the bottom of the slide without having to use the others. So with some of your more traditional vendors, large IAM players, it's kind of an all or nothing proposition. You can add Ori to an existing solution to start to modernize it or to begin some kind of phased approach to replacing it. Um, I think it's also worth mentioning that Ori is very scalable. One of our customers is OpenAI of ChatGPT fame, who is now up to 800 million weekly active users. So it is one of the most visited and used applications in the world. And as we've kind of mentioned throughout this webinar, the agentic scale is going to be probably beyond anything that we've seen before. And if your current IAM systems are struggling with its current duties, if you will, it's going to choke on AI agents when they become the norm.
Yep.
Um, I just encourage you to take some time, come to Ori's website, ori.com, learn more about what we're calling a modern approach to identity. I don't, I want to leave a whole 6 minutes for questions. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, let's go with the last slide and then dive into
Great.
questions.
All right, Raleigh, do you want to speak on how to get the white paper, and then we'll go into questions?
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Yes, as a thank you for attending today's webinar, you will be receiving a free copy of this new white paper. You will receive an email from EMA early next week with a link to download it. Thanks again for taking time out to join us today. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. The first one, Ken, is for you. And Damon, of course, feel free to add in anything you'd like to. Ken, the question is 79% of organizations without a written policy deploy AI agents anyway. What is the biggest immediate security risk this creates? And what is the single most important control an organization should put in place right now to address it?
So, I mean, without the policies in place, you have no idea how well you're securing those agents in the first place. And Damon, please feel free to jump in on this, but I think that policies should be developed that are intent driven, restrict the agents to this is what I want the agent to do. Here's the guardrails I want to put on the agent. Principle of least privilege, and of course the industry's favorite buzzword right now, which is zero trust. I think that's probably the best approach is restrict that agent to the bare minimum of what capabilities you want it to be able to do, and that's really the way to secure it.
Yeah, I'd say, use existing standards too. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. OAuth 2, OpenID Connect can provide a nice framework to automate authentication and consent. We've got role-based access control. Can you give an agent a role? Sure. Can you do attribute-based access control? Yeah. I mean, but get those in place. You need an authorization server.
Yeah.
Other things I'd add, again, I think I hit on this before, but seek flexibility. We're in the beginning stages of agentic use. The future is likely to change things. If you go with a vendor that's rigid, that doesn't allow you to change things easily or make a process your own, you're going to find yourself in a similar situation, saying these exact same things a year or two from now, and probably had some nefarious activities happen. So
Yeah.
I think scale is another thing. I mean, I'm just trying to hit a couple of these. Again, I hit scale on the last slide, but I'm gonna hit it again. And it was also, I think, the least organizations felt that scale was least likely with the existing IAM solutions that they had. And so, when we keep throwing, agents at this issue, you have to get that. So, I mean, like, again, use existing standards, get the policies in place, and then, play them out in some kind of authorization server, seek flexibility from your vendor, and then make sure that it can scale without issues or degradation in service and that kind of thing. Make sure that it's resilient. You'll be better served by doing that. And I encourage you to take a look at some of the, what I would call newer, more modern entrance to the space for IAM, like Ory, but others as well, and compare them against what you have today and where it falls short.
Great
Very
insights.
good.
Let's take one more question, Damon, starting with you. Organizations see human oversight as a key goal for agentic AI, but the presentation states human involvement isn't scalable. How do we automate the necessary oversight and safety functions so human involvement can be removed without increasing risk?
I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's basically what I just said. I mean, like, again, it's use the thing, use the standards that we already have. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. We have tools that can do this, but again, those tools need to be flexible. They need to be scalable. That's really it. I mean, like, believe that the human cannot scale. I mean, like, to me,
Right.
I'm surprised that we think that it can. But it's much easier to build automation into a system, and apply it consistently across the landscape. Without doing that, we introduce humans, and we introduce, well, we're all fallible. We all make errors. We all screw things up. Machines have less chance of doing that, even though they're becoming self-aware and maybe take over the world, here soon. But, it's that kind of thing. Do not think that human involvement is going to be your answer. It's not scalable. Build the automation into the tools such that they can be applied universally, versus piecemeal or at a particular time.
Yeah, and I think that automation is really going to be the key to all that. Is we're not going to be able to do just human management of agentic agents. We're talking we're going to end up reaching to the point where organizations are going to have hundreds of thousands, if not even millions of agents at some point. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. So awesome. Well, Raleigh, thank you very much. Or do we have any more questions, or are we out of time?
We are out of time, but I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who attended. Like I said, the research paper has in-depth insights from this new research, so be sure to download the white paper. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope we'll see you at a future EMA Research webinar. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Riley. Thanks, Damon.
See ya. Thank you.